Welcome to Staff Development Day. I hope you all enjoyed breakfast. I think even more welcome to summer. We need it. And I do want to acknowledge that this has been a really tough year for many reasons, and many of you have been involved in different things along the way. I also have to acknowledge the loss of our dear colleague, Vice President Eric Estes, just a little bit more than a week ago. So I know there are people out there across the university who are still, acclimating to that and getting over that. So there'll be a celebration of his life in September, which you will learn about. So what I'm doing this morning is I'm introducing our speaker, and I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. This is Wendy Schiller. She is a professor of political science. Actually, she is a chair. It's the Allison S. Ressler Professor of Political Science. She directs the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy, which is in the Watson Institute. She's been chair of the Department of Political Science, and this coming year she will be acting as director of the Watson Institute as we prepare to found and establish a new school. So the service to the university is amazing. But in addition to all of that, she is an outstanding scholar. And, she got her PhD at University of Chicago. She's also had real experience in politics, which is fantastic. And she teaches wildly popular courses. Just some examples, these are all things we should all want to take: The American Presidency, Introduction to the American Political Process, and Congress and Public Policy. I think I need that one right now. So I could go on about the numerous books that she's written, but I think she's really known for her insight into Congress, how the American political process works, and she also knows a lot about Rhode Island, too. So if you have questions about that, you could ask her. Now, in addition to being a great scholar and a great teacher and a great leader here at Brown, you may know her best because you've seen her on MSNBC or heard her on NPR or CNN or Bloomberg News, the Providence Journal, WPRO, et cetera, et cetera. So she contributes to our university, our state, and the country in many, many ways. So I would like you to join me in welcoming Professor Schiller. Thank you.
Okay, all right, this is now on, right? We're on? Yeah. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, so how many of you seen me before? I'm not a big fan of the podium, so I usually come this way. And then how many listen to Gene Valicenti on Tuesday mornings? Oh, all right. How many don't want to admit that they listen to Gene Valicenti on Tuesday mornings? Okay, so this happens every time. I taught 8:30 in the morning American Presidency past spring. People who are standing, come on down. There are plenty of seats in the front. Nobody's going to make you stay forever. Come on. It's going to be 45 minutes on your feet. This is exactly what the students do. Everyone has to sit down. This is not unusual for the morning. So some of you may know from the program that I am delivering the keynote. So what we'll do is, and sometimes I'm not as good as I will be, but there's a clock right there that's precisely 10 minutes fast. So I'm going to speak for 30 minutes, and then I'm going to have the pleasure of being asked questions by the big boss, President Paxson. It's been a long time since I was quizzed by anybody who might have some fate over my employment, but I'll handle it. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. I'm also giving a talk this afternoon at 1:15, I believe in Macmillan. I think it's 1:13 or 1:17. I'll be in the right room, on the election. So we're not going to talk too much about politics this morning, per se, but I'll be giving another talk this afternoon, if you can tear yourself away from the incredible weather we're having. Okay, so what do I want to talk about today? There we go. So these are when I give a lecture in class, I start with 3 broad questions in the hope that the students write them down and then are able to answer them on the exam. This year in presidency, on the first exam, that was not particularly successful, so I had to regroup, but I'm hopeful that it will be successful with this audience. So first of all, can we compare American life to past years? We're constantly being asked to compare, is it better now, is it worse? The good old days, whatever anybody thinks they were and when they happened. What did that look like? What does it look like today? And are we really being realistic when we make the comparisons? And are we paying attention to common daily experiences that we have in our life? If you travel, if you get on a plane, my husband's not particularly a big fan of flying, so he doesn't get on a plane frequently, but I do. Do you sit down and immediately say, what is your party affiliation? No. You say, where are you going? Oh, is it to visit family? Is it business? Have you been before? There's a good place to eat in this city. We're here, and have you done this? And, you start conversations about the components of our lives. And there are macro forces in our American society that are pushing us constantly away from what we share rather than towards what we share. And the common experiences, even on the supermarket line, and I'm fortunate, I've been with my husband 20 years now, but when I first started dating him, we went to the supermarket, and I'm a talker. So if you're standing on a long line, I turn around, oh, how you doing? Nice day. And he's a quiet guy, and he said, you talk to people you don't know. And I said, yeah, because, he said, well, why do you do that or something? I'm like, because we're both stuck on the line for some indefinite period of time. So, make conversation. And that's what we forget. And the person next to you or the person driving down the road or, does something that irritates you when you're driving or whatever it is, you think, you get your back up, and then you think, well, maybe they're having a really horrible day. Well, what's their backstory? And we just are in such a rush that we forget to do that. So one of the things I want to really continuously urge us to do as Americans is remember that we do have more in common with each other than what separates us. And that's just a fact, despite all the forces that are trying to remind us, to persuade us of otherwise. And how, again, as the enormity of informational sources affect how we see the world. Those of you of a certain age, and it's such a diverse group in terms of age, except that I feel like I'm on the older side in this room, a feeling I'm continuously getting used to now at Brown. This is June 30th. It'll be my 30th year here. Oh, no. I don't want applause for that. It's entirely unclear to me that should warrant applause. But anyway, so I think so just trying to even think about where people get their information from or why their heads are always in their phones or why is it so vital to figure out what's on Instagram today, that's all new to American society. But it's not the first time we have new technology. And I gave a talk last year where we talked about this more. When radio was invented, that was really new. And when television was invented, literally people wrote columns in newspapers, the hard copy version, that said the world was ending. That this was going to, remember, I don't know how many of a certain age your parents said it's going to rot your brain, stop watching television. Now when you teach students, they don't even know what television is. When I say you watch it on TV, they look at me with some blank stare. Like, I don't know what that is. That's important because technological innovation generally advances society and advances the world. And that is true for the United States as well. And we go through these periods of getting used to these new ways of communicating, and we decide the world will end and the democracy will end. And luckily, that has proven not to be true. So let's think a little bit more about that. So this is my, in case you're feeling like doom and gloom, which I don't think you should feel about America, let's think about some basic ways to navigate, particularly navigating the next 6 months in particular, but just generally at Brown, generally interacting with people. So one of the things that I think can be overwhelming to people is that they feel like they don't have power or influence or that they're not making a difference. I can tell you that everybody in this room, and this is where being here 30 years is helpful for perspective, makes a difference. In everything that I do when I step on campus, all of you make a difference. From the beginning of my day to the end of my day, on the weekends, in the evenings, everywhere. I walk into classrooms, they're ready to go. I need to do something with a course, or I need to travel. I don't need to travel, but I do. I need help with a student who's in crisis. Any of those things, all of you make that possible. And this is a spectacularly well-run campus, and it is such a pleasure and honor to work here. So just remember, when you're doing your daily job, that's what you contribute, but what more do you want to do? If there's something you want to have an impact on, how can you do that? And how can you direct your energy to do that? Think about that. It doesn't have to be big. The second thing, engage with your local political, social, and economic environment. Meaning, think local. A French guy, there's nothing wrong with the French. It's a nice country. I haven't been there that often, but it's a nice country when I have gone once. But the point is this. A guy named Alexis de Tocqueville wrote a very long book, which I would be literally run out of the classroom if I signed. It's like 1,500 pages. But he traveled around America in the 1830s by horse, and then sometimes by horse and carriage if you had some money. And he noted what made America amazing. And it was local America. It was local communities everywhere in America that were very different from each other, but that adopted the same principles about freedom, for example, to some extent religious tolerance, but also when he was traveling the country, we of course had horrific racial oppression, and violence against Native and Indigenous peoples. It was not the perfect picture, but the bulwark of America is local, your local community, and that's something to think about. Go to a town meeting. I know they're not held that frequently. Or if some politician is having an open house or a Zoom, check in for 15 minutes if you can. Really immerse yourself in the local community, because in the end of the day, that is the lifeblood, I think, of the United States. And try to pick and choose where you want your voice to be heard. So when I say make your voice heard in the areas most important to you, that takes a little thought as well. But one product of social media, it's a different lecture, but is that we all think we know a lot about everything. So we weigh in on everything. I was just having brunch. My cousin was nice enough to drive down from Massachusetts and have brunch with us, and we started talking about something neither one of us knew really anything about. And we started riffing to see who could be more persuasive about the subject we knew nothing about. My husband and my other cousin thought it was funny, but I thought, this is what people do in real time. They weigh in on social media, and they don't know anything about that. So I like to say to everybody that I speak to, when someone says, well, they say, I always like to say, who is they? Just a simple question in a family gathering. Where'd you get the information from? I do it actually to my academic colleagues in political science, and it's sometimes not as appreciated as I would have thought. So, I struggle with this. I just had a meeting yesterday, and I thought, I have to really up my game on this. Offer your opinion in a constructive way. Sometimes I jump the gun and offer the opinion without the constructive part. Take 30 seconds to think, how will this be received? I have been told I'm a hammer in search of a nail. I've worked on it over time. The beauty of aging is you get a little bit better at this. But taking 30 to 45 seconds and thinking, if I phrase this one way with a child, a spouse, a partner at work, whatever it is, and I phrase it a different way, what will be more effective? It's not about being overly concerned with someone's feelings. It's how do you get what you need done? And that's something that I consistently struggle with, but I think is really important. And this is create an environment of tolerance whenever you can. And this is a big question in today's America. When people say things, not so much on social media, I have another bullet point about that, you'll see. Resist the urge to press the like button on your social media account. Weigh in when you think it's important that your voice be heard. But when you see or experience intolerance, it's important to make note of that. You don't have to put yourself in harm's way. You don't have to put yourself at risk. but you can make it clear that you don't approve. And that's something we've lost in our social media environment, which is the power to shame. And you think, oh, you don't want to shame anybody. No, sometimes, in fact, you do. The concept of shame is as old as Greek democracy. It's really old. But we have lost that ability because we don't interact personally as much as we used to. So you don't want to be lording over somebody. That's sort of a masculine kind of term. But you want to make it clear that if somebody uses disempowering language, you're not a fan. And you can do that whatever way is comfortable to you. But it is important to do that and not walk away as Meg Ryan does. And ever said You've Got Mail? Anybody see that movie? See, this is what I do in class, and I date myself considerably because they're like, who is Meg Ryan? I actually asked about Star Trek, which is even before my time, the original Star Trek. And they said, yeah, no, we've seen it in repeats. But the point is this. She says in that movie, I wish I had said this. I feel strongly that when you're in a community and somebody has been disempowered, inadvertently or on purpose, and you didn't sort of make it clear you disapproved, you missed the moment. And I think that's part of the glue that we all can contribute to sort of pushing back against some of the negative vibes that we're experiencing in America today. Okay, ask questions when you think you know even when you think you know the answers. Tip O'Neill was a congressperson from Massachusetts. Anybody who lives in Massachusetts or anybody here of Tip O'Neill? Pretty good, right? Well, George, you know everything. But Tip O'Neill was a congressperson from Massachusetts. He took over Senator John F. Kennedy, then elected President John F. Kennedy's congressional seat. And he was it's a classic story. It's in a book by John Barry called Man of the House. And it's a classic story of President Lyndon Johnson wanted a bill passed. And Tip O'Neill was on the committee, and he was one of the key votes. And he wouldn't vote for the bill. And Johnson, I don't know about Lyndon Johnson, tall guy, big guy, kind of a bully, didn't like it when people didn't do what he wanted them to do. And this guy was in Congress. Tip O'Neill was in Congress maybe 3 years at this point, 4 years max, sort of a newbie. And Johnson says, what's wrong with this guy? And his staff says, well, he just won't vote for it. He's got some issue. So he literally calls. There used to be a phone in hearing rooms in the Congress behind the hearing room you see on TV. There's a little seminar room, and there was a phone, an actual phone. You know, the phone that you pick up like you die. So there's a phone, and that's for sort of big shots. So Johnson calls that phone, and they pull Tip O'Neill, a very young Tip O'Neill, not the Tip O'Neill you probably remember, out of the room, and it's the president. And he says, son, what's the problem? What's the holdup? And Tip O'Neill says, Mr. President, I would like to focus, but Boston Navy Yard has 2 contracts pending with the Navy, and we haven't heard anything back. And that's 3,000 jobs for my constituents. If I heard back from them, I could focus on the bill in the committee. So Johnson, true story, Johnson puts him on hold, or his operator puts him on hold. He calls the Secretary of the Navy, gets the contracts cleared, calls him back, gets back on and says, he curses, you have your blank contracts. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I have a clear conscience now. I can walk in and support the bill. Goes back in, votes, the bill is cleared. What's the moral? People like to be asked for their vote. So Tip O'Neill always said people like to be asked, but he wanted to be asked, and he wanted to trade with the president. So asking questions about other people, or asking questions when somebody's working on something they find exciting and you know the answers, but you make them feel more important by doing that you appreciate what they're doing, takes very little time, and it can be conducive to a healthier work and life environment. I just said, call out small injustices as often as larger ones. I am somebody that, if I'm in a line, I have a thing about lines, frequently people will walk right in front of me. And it's not because they're bad people. They literally don't see me. It's true. I mean, it's true. And especially now. When I was a kid, it was okay. It was okay, bearable. Now everyone's taller. So what? And I used to get so angry. I'm here. And then I realized they just didn't see me. The point is, if you see someone sort of disregarding somebody else, even if it's by accident, find a way to acknowledge it and try to fix it. And then yield to the power of hope. I mean, you got to get up in the morning and think, okay, it's a bad day, bad things have happened, but life is very bumpy. It's very bumpy, and there's good and there's bad. And you have to have hope. And most of all, America, I'll say this at the end and I'll say it now, is still, in my opinion, the greatest country on the planet, and it's worth investing in. So don't give it up on it, and that means lots of things: political, social, and economic involvement. Okay, so here's the good news and some of the less good news. Just a few indicators about how we're doing. Infant mortality has decreased dramatically. Our cancer death rate, and of course, I lost a loved one to cancer. Cancer is still scary, cancer is still difficult, but it doesn't kill nearly as many people as it did even 30 years ago. 30 years ago, which is a remarkable accomplishment. And the United States has led the way in cancer research. And of course, Brown is now, with Lifespan, has a new dedicated cancer center. So Rhode Island itself is coming up in the game. High school dropout rate has declined to 27% in 1960 to 5% now. That's a big deal. And we'll talk a little bit about education, hopefully in the Q&A. Voter turnout is actually the thing that stayed a little stagnant. It's about the same, but many more people can vote. So when you think about percentage turnout, that's the same, but the wide range of people who now have legal access to voting has changed dramatically since 1960, in particular, black voters versus whites. So you think about black voting in 1960 is 50% turnout rate, and now it's 75% turnout rate. So this is crucially important. To say that it took far too long and it was the greatest moral stain on the country is to acknowledge that, but also to cheer the fact that things have equalized. Gender economics, women in the workforce, 38% to now 55.5% in the workforce. And pay equity, in 1960, women earned 60.7% of the same work. In 2019, women earned 82%. Still not okay. And another thing that's not okay is this last bullet point: racial and ethnic, socially constructed race, socially constructed ethnicity. These earnings gaps persist. That should say gaps. I have a typo, I apologize. So white, black, and Latino, that is also not okay. There's a whole nother lecture to be had on that, but those are things we still have to work on. But to say that we are not better off as a country in all these dimensions than we were 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago is not true. Flat out not true. And I use the word true because there are things that are true and there are things that are not true. Okay, this is I hope you can see it. It's just about population distribution. And when you see the dark colors, it means more people, and the lighter colors and the dark reds, that's fewer people. If you want to understand some of the politics that's going on, you need to also understand where people are moving and where people are leaving, where people are staying. And so we see that the Southeast, particularly Florida, Texas, even Arizona, growing in population, North Carolina, South Carolina, even, and then all the other parts of the country, some of them are declining. Coastal is still doing pretty well. This has a great deal to do with our politics. So I'm watching my time. So economic growth by county, a little squishier of a map, but you can see where, again, the Southeast and the West, some of the West, even the Northeast a little bit, has pretty significant economic growth, but the middle of the country is hurting. And when people are hurting, they get angry. They get angry that their children have to leave to find a job in some other state. They get angry that they can't see their grandchildren regularly. They get angry that they worked all their lives and their town is gone. And they want someone to blame. And so that anger, you can argue, can lead you to irrational opinions. On the other hand, is perfectly justified. You played by the rules, you did what you thought was right, you settled in a particular part of the country, and for all sorts of reasons, you can't sustain your life there. And nobody is helping you. Nobody. Democrats, Republicans, nobody's helping you. That is a source of discontent. That is what Tocqueville would go back and say is of concern. When your local community sort of disintegrates, what do you do? Where do you go? And some people I've talked to could be academic, could not be academic, say, well, they can just move. Not so easy to move. I married a guy who left Rhode Island and came back. How many? Interesting thing. I grew up in New York, and I didn't go back, but he left for 7 years, and he was like, he's very proud of that, and then he came back. Well, it's a great place to live. I'd come back, too, if I were born here. But the point is this. Some people can't go back. There's not anything to go back to. So thinking about how we manage that and stay together as a country, that is a challenge. And I haven't heard any good solutions to that lately, but thinking about economic growth is important. Now, with climate change, I fully expect that some of that Florida growth is going to push up. It's already pushing up to North and South Carolina. It's going to push all the way up here. And it's not just, as my husband's family says, New Yorkers invading Rhode Island. The bridge broke, it's New Yorkers. I'm like, really? The cars we drive are that much heavier? And I can't say we anymore. I've been out of New York for so long, but I still do. I can't give up the Yankees or the Giants. Okay, time. Okay, I have 5 minutes. This happens to me every time. Okay, how do perceptions of economic growth differ from objective measures? And we're going to talk about this in a little bit in the Q&A. I know it feels like you go to the supermarket, you're like, what happened to these prices? Ridiculous. On the other hand, the economy is vibrant and very healthy. We gained 260,000 jobs last month. The unemployment rate is now ticked up to 4%. Part of that is more people are looking for work. The point is, I don't know if you grew up in the 80s, many of you did not, but if you grew up in the 80s, this looks pretty good. And yet, most people are saying, oh, it's terrible. Why? That is a huge question, because if it affects your political choices, it can be distortive. So this is like, this is the economy, unemployment. All of us, most of us are old enough to remember the recent Great Recession, the horrific difficulties we had in the recession. And then also looking in 1985, thinking about unemployment. Unemployment skyrocketed in COVID, obviously, but now it's back down. Historically, unemployment is about as low as it can ever be. And so this is something for us to think about. Now, inflation's a less good picture. So here's inflation, and inflation has skyrocketed. That's another lecture. I might talk a little bit about that in this afternoon's lecture, but I want to get to immigration because we are the free state. Immigration as a measure of diversity. We have the highest percentage of immigrants in the United States, 13.7. That's as of 2018. It's gone down a little bit. Now it's about 12.6%. This is something to think about. Foreign born, 1970. This is what the country looked like. Percent foreign born. Not very high. This is the country now. This is 2024, so we are 13.4%. It is about the same. All of this is shaded purple. It's all much higher than it's ever been in history. On the planet, in the modern world, we as a country except for the Syrian crisis, which sent a lot of refugees to Europe, more people from other countries than any other country ever has. So people always say, Europe does everything better. Europe doesn't do this better. We have always been a nation of newcomers, always. And it has built a fabric. It's not just Rhode Island, it's the whole country. We are more diverse than ever before, and we are more welcoming, even though the rhetoric seems to be difficult, than ever before. Do we have a legal immigration system that needs help and needs reform? Yes, we do. Does the idea that any one group has a monopoly on being American? No, they don't. Look at that map. Everybody, so many new people, and it brings all sorts of things. We know this well in Rhode Island. We do it well. We know it well, and it's really important. And this is also something that very few sound bites on any cable TV show are going to show you. It's from the Census Bureau. When you look at the employment status of people who are coming, immigrants, 63.5% of immigrants are employed. 63.5% immigrants. It includes undocumented and documented. And not in the labor force, maybe they're old, maybe disabled, and 3.2% unemployed. If somebody sits in a room and says to you, immigrants don't work, you tell them you are wrong. That is not true. Another fact, and an important fact to disseminate. So, and thinking about what they do, all sorts of different jobs. It's really important to understand exactly what we do and why we do it so well and what makes us unique. And why do people come here? I worked for a guy named Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He was a senator from New York, and his name is everywhere if you ever use the Amtrak in New York in the building on 9th Avenue, and nobody knows who he is. I asked people. Nobody. Nobody. Point is this, he used to say, the day that people don't want to come to this country is the day we have to start worrying. So just keep that in mind. And I'm going to finish. Views on immigrants, 62% of America as of 2019. This pretty much has changed a little bit. Immigrants, people are really in favor of. The next poll, I'm going to go, I didn't put this one. I'm going to go back. I have another slide. When you call somebody a migrant versus an immigrant, the public approval rating changes. So America doesn't want migrants, but America's very happy with immigrants. Think about that when you absorb information and when you're in conversation. Okay, the good news, I'm going to cruise through this and then go to Q&A. The growing diversity of congressional membership. We have more people from different socially constructed race and ethnic categories than ever before. The Congressional Black Caucus is bigger than it's ever been. The Latino Caucus is bigger than it's ever been. That means the number of people in Congress who join a particular caucus, but that's the number of African Americans in the House of Representatives in particular. That is no small feat. Just think in the time the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights was passed in 1965, when there were very few African Americans in the House, and now we have 60, and we have more Latino members, reflecting population. So thinking about that, and women, okay, this isn't a good slide. They're really old. I can't apologize for it. It's just fact. I shouldn't say really old. I would have said that 20 years ago, but the average age of a senator is 64, not so old, and 58 is the House member. But that matters because as you get an older and older governing class, and that's the lecture for this afternoon, the more space there is between young people and the people who are running the government, and that's hard to keep them engaged when people are much, much older. Okay, diversity religious composition. We see over time that, this is from bottom to top. So we see much more religious, but most members of Congress are Protestant. Most. So that's an interesting thing, but there are many, many more religious affiliations in Congress than ever before. And then for women, we are a historic high for women in Congress. It's 131 in the House, 25 in the Senate. So we're still, there are 51% of America's women, so 25% doesn't sound great, but it's a lot better than ever before. Okay, and that's women governors. We have more women governors. We're still a little bit behind, but we went from 8 to 12. And we've had a women governor here. We've had more leaders in Congress. Nevada has an all-majority female legislature. Michigan is close to that too. So there are lots of ways in which all of the voices in America and people in America that could not actively participate as early, even in the 1970s, are now actively, vibrantly in our workforce, in our economy, in our social life, and in our politics. And don't discount all that progress when you walk out the door today. And think, how can you actually contribute to that for your kids and moving forward? So that's how I want to leave you, and then we're going to do a Q&A. Oh, wait, I need to announce one. President Paxton's coming up for the Q&A, and then Marie Williams will be closing our session today. So don't walk out before you hear from her.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Yeah, thank you so much. That was really amazing. And I just have one or two questions before we open it up to the audience, because I know there are going to be a lot of questions from all of you. But one thing that really has puzzled me is, especially since the pandemic, people seem grumpy. They just don't seem joyful. And you give this optimistic picture of where the U.S. is going. And we can start with the economy. There seems like there's a disconnect between the numbers, the economic numbers, which are quite strong, and how people feel about it. How do you square that?
There's a couple of reasons. One is you know, our memories can be short. You know, we were really, as I said, in 2008 and 2009, all the way through 2016, in serious crisis, right, with the economy. People didn't just lose their jobs, they lost their homes. They lost life savings. And some people never recovered. So there's not only that hangover for particular communities, but also a hangover from COVID and the physical loss of life, but also the economy. And so we have people who feel like they aren't where they thought they would be. And that tends to be older people, but that breeds a lot. Second is, you know, you have localized economic effects. So you may be doing well and your kids are employed and your family's employed, but you can't buy a new house, or you can't because of the local forces on the housing market, for example. And that makes you feel like you're stuck and that you've worked hard and you can't achieve what you want. So even though you are much better than you were, most people 10 years ago, you can't have everything you want. And the third problem is literally the ubiquity of social media. So anybody who secretly watched The Real Housewives of New York City ever? Secretly? Who would never admit that in her department faculty meeting? You watch these shows and you look at everybody and they look fantastic. They have a lot of filler and stuff like that. But they always look great, and they live these lives where they're drinking wine at lunch and like this whole thing. That is everywhere. Everywhere we look at images of lives that people lead, even Facebook. I left Facebook a couple of reasons. I wasn't a big fan of Mark Zuckerberg, so I can't join Instagram. But still, you know why? Because everybody's life was great. You get on Facebook, and here's all these great pictures and my great vacation, and everybody was great. And I thought, well, my life isn't great. Like, so what's wrong with me? This is a real impact. It's a real effect. It is really cognitively important to recognize that a lot of that stuff is fake, and you don't know people's backstories, but it makes you feel less satisfied with what you have. And by the way, you know, having things, for example, I need a cell phone. I'm not even a flip phone. I need a mobile phone. I need all these things. And now technology has made it so you do need a phone, right? So, I mean, I think there are things that now economically we think we need, and we do need to function in our society, that cost money. And I think the standard of living, either what you expect you're going to have or what other people have, has made us all feel like we're not where we need to be, when in fact, on all levels, we're in much better shape than ever before.
So thank you. And you've been kind of harsh on social media, but you also started with this example of the radio and the TV. And so, and social media purports to bring communities together and create networks. So do you see good forces, and how can we kind of strengthen that part of social media?
Yeah, I think Facebook, for example, I think can be really good for people in reaching out and staying connected, your high school friends, whatever, if you went to college, your college friends, your family. I do think Zoom, for example, we have a regular family Zoom. We never had one before. We live around the country. So I think there are ways technology and media can be really bonding and also make us more tolerant. We see things from all over the country, which makes us feel sad when they're bad things. On the other hand, we have a much better idea of how everybody else across the country lives. And that's really important for unity. So it's kind of this trade-off. When I was a kid and I read the paper, I didn't know bad things were happening in Iowa and Nebraska. They were never in my local paper. But now I know. So I think in that sense, the community support, fundraising, tolerance, and this is where shaming comes in. You can shame, I said I believe in shame, but I don't believe in censure or canceling. I don't believe in bullying. So there's a fine line between you did something wrong and now it's on social media, so now you're a pariah forever. That's not what I'm talking about, and that's where it can cross over. But instances, for example, of police violence against African Americans without social media, I don't think we would have made the modest progress we have in society on just thinking about policing. We need police, absolutely. We just want to make sure that people are getting equal treatment. And I think without social media, those movements couldn't have happened.
Yeah. So when you look at the numbers, you see good economic numbers, and people maybe don't feel as good about the economy as would be reflected. What about just how people, do they feel powerful? Do they feel like they have agency in society, or more so or less so than in the past?
I think that people feel less powerful now in some ways and more powerful in others. Like you can do things on your phone that used to take you forever to do, and now you can do them. But if you are somebody who is older, let's say, and isn't used to technology, and you want to do something that you used to be able to go to a building and do, and now you can't, that makes you feel disempowered and disconnected from government. So I think there hasn't been enough transition for people who don't have access. Plus, you need a mobile network. You need wireless, right? You need these things. These cost money. So in that sense, the shift to efficiency has created some segment of society that feels disempowered. I think also when Congress doesn't pass a bill or the state legislature doesn't pass a bill or a bridge breaks and you don't really know why, you feel like you pay taxes and lo and behold, the roads are really bad and you have to go to the body shop because your car hit a pothole. You feel not powerful. You feel like I'm doing all the right things and paying taxes and nobody's listening to me. So I think the idea is striking a balance is trying to make your voice heard productively and understand that you want to keep ahead of the efforts to make you so dependent on technology, like without a human being there. Because that will not make you more powerful over time. And just scrolling on your algorithm is predetermined. Every time you click on something, they reset your algorithm. That's what I meant about resisting like or dislike. Every time you do that, you give more power to the algorithm of your social media network to control what you're seeing. Rather than just consuming. If you just consume, they don't quite know, if you don't click on it, what you're doing, and then you'll get a broader range of things to consume.
So the thing that makes me feel the most angry and powerless is when I can't get a live human on the phone.
Right.
Right? I mean, really, that's technology, but it's like, I want a human.
Right.
I don't want, right?
Right.
So I'm going to ask you one politics question. I know this is probably more for the afternoon lecture, but I'm just curious. You know, we look at approval ratings of American institutions. Universities actually are doing less well than they used to, but they're still far above Congress.
Yes.
And Congress has an approval rating of 13%.
Right.
Why do they keep getting elected?
Yeah. So this has been a phenomenon that's at least 40, if not, 45 years old now, as long as we've been doing some polling, that people love their congressperson, but they hate Congress. So this is in part because the Congress, the inside game in the Congress and the House is every 2 years, the Senate is, this is the overall rating in Congress, Senate is every 6 years, is that while they're fighting and seemingly not getting things done, they do actually get their share of federal dollars. So they actually, Senator Jack Reed's coming home all the time with big fake checks and doing, because he delivers a lot of money from the Appropriations Committee. And so this is getting your tax dollars back to you, things like development of Quonset, for example, all sorts of things. So, and they come home a lot and they talk to you and they listen. And then you think, I know them, and they're one of me, and they're fighting for us. It's all the other people that are bad. And you multiply that by 435 districts. The second reason is that state legislatures control how we draw our districts every 10 years because of the Constitution. And ever since the 1830s, Elbridge Gerry, who was the governor of Massachusetts, figured out how to draw districts that would favor his party. It's called gerrymandering. That's why it's called gerrymandering. He figured it out. Pretty strategically smart politician without the benefit of a computer to draw the districts. The founders made a fundamental mistake. They gave the power to regulate all elections and districts to state legislatures. Those are elected politicians who want to stay in power and advantage their own party. And so that was a mistake in the Constitution because now we can't fix it. And they draw these district lines to advantage their own party. You can overcome gerrymandering. So in 1994, Newt Gingrich did it. He won 52 new Republican seats. He beat a lot of Democratic incumbents. And then in 2006, Nancy Pelosi did it for the Democrats. So you can do it. But these forces, these institutional forces, and also the efforts of Congress people to come home and be one of you, make it so that you elect them, between 84 to 90% of senators and 94% of House members get reelected. Yeah, it's a lot. Although, by the way, some of them quit if they're not going to win. So it's a little bit of a distorted statistic. We have 41 or 42 members not running again this year, and you got to figure half of them probably would have lost. So it's a little bit lower, but it's really high. Yeah, it's really high. And Congress, the government is a very big government. We'll talk about that this afternoon. So that they do nothing is not quite true, but watch them this summer and see how they behave collectively.
Thank you. So we have, I think, given the clock speed is a little bit off, I think we have 10 minutes for Q&A, and then we have a little bit of time for Marie at the end.
Yeah.
So I want to open it up to the audience. I think we have, do we have people with microphones? You have to use a microphone because there are people who are watching live stream.
We have a question? Anybody? All right.
Right down here.
Yeah, my question concerns taxation. People love to complain about taxes, but taxes now, personal income taxes and things are lower now than they've been. I feel that we've been in a race to the bottom in cutting taxes. And it's a problem. I see it as a problem. When people complain about the deficits, and yet they want to pay less taxes. And I feel that we were given a bait and switch kind of thing. When Ronald Reagan was president and cut taxes, that was the beginning, at least in my recollection, the beginning of this race to cut taxes everywhere. And he gave as his reason for cutting taxes that the federal government was doing too much and the states had to do more. So the federal government could cut taxes, but the states, that meant, but it was implied, but not really said, that meant the states were going to have to raise taxes.
Let's see what Wendy thinks about that. I want to save time for more than one question.
Yeah, but so I feel like, what do you
what's the deal with taxes?
Yeah.
That's what you want to know.
Yeah. Okay. What's the deal with taxes? But the states are competing against each other. So,
yes, they are.
So they can't raise taxes the way,
So there's I would say a couple of things about taxes. One is, so you're right, Dwight D. Eisenhower was president from 1953 to 1961. He was the first one to really cut the top rates, but then they were still really high. In 1986 was the really major tax reform, but the Democratic House of Representatives, led by Tip O'Neill, went along very happily with that tax cut. So taxes. Americans will pay taxes if they think that money is delivering. So we know this over and over again. You're willing to pay taxes when you think the money is spent efficiently and you're getting what you need. A road that won't kill your car. You're getting schools that work. You're getting access to things that aren't broken, right? That's what you want. National defense, a lot of other things. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. People will do it. The difference is that there's a lot of difference across the country in how people view taxes. So in the Southeast and Southwest, they'll put temporary taxes. Something New England does not have an idea of what temporary means. But in Texas or Oklahoma, they need to redo a highway or a bridge or an airport. They'll actually put a 5-cent tax on your sales for a couple of years. And then when they have the money, they take it off. Here, there isn't a tax I think we've had that has been taken off. So it's a very, culturally, the same things about expectations of government really determine taxes. And so the idea of waste, one person's government waste is another person's money to develop Quonset, right? So when you think about waste, it's money coming back to the states in a lot of ways. But we still pay a lower tax rate than most of Europe does. But people feel government is so big and hard to access that even when it is actually working, as you say, it's hard to get a real person on the phone, it's hard to get answers, and you feel like it's not working. but it's just bigger than it's ever been. And state budgets, rather than shrinking or raising taxes in response to Reagan in the 80s, they've just gone up. So we're at $13.9 billion in Rhode Island. That's the budget. I like the fact that Shekarchi kept it under $14 billion just for rhetorical reasons. You'd say it's under $14 billion. That's a lot of money for 1,027,000 people. So this is the issue, and both parties contribute to spending issues. I don't think we can really blame it on either party. But the tax cuts that Donald Trump put in place that are expiring in 2025 will be extended. Either party will not risk the wrath of the middle class of America by, killing those tax cuts, but so that's the problem. The idea that billionaires don't pay their fair share, that's a whole nother lecture. And I don't know that that's the answer to a more effective way for government to spend people's taxpayer dollars.
Thank you. Other questions? We have a lot of hands up.
I want to take one from the back.
I'm letting the person with the mic decide.
Thank you. I really appreciated the advice you gave. I noticed that it was especially oriented toward kind of individual action and not so much around collective action, institutional action. Similarly with the indicators, we didn't focus on socioeconomic stratification so much, which I understand is not as good an indicator, corresponds perhaps with decline of unionized industries in some cases. And I'm curious if, that was an intentional focus on the individual, which is maybe very American, or if there's more you'd like to say around collective action.
I think that the parties and political parties in power and even economic forces work very hard to discourage collective action. There's no question about that. You see some big companies discouraging unionization, for example. It is government, in FDR's time, the 1930s, government that really created the right to unionize and the right to a safe working environment and the right to a minimum wage. That was government and political parties. And even though it seems to be enshrined, I will tell you that it's not enshrined and that you have to keep fighting for it if you believe in it. We see that states, in this case, devolution works well if you're someone who believes that minimum wage should be higher, because states have gone well beyond the federal minimum wage. So that is why it's in the First Amendment, and it gets difficult. We've seen that this year. Collective action, meaning the right to assemble, it's written in the First Amendment. The right to petition the government for redress of grievances. That is a fundamental right, but it has to be exercised peacefully and with a specific goal in mind. And it is the same backbone of unionization and labor rights as it is for speech, policies about things that we've been grappling with. It's all the same, but the effectiveness is when you can persuade the people who aren't marching with you that this is a value that we need to adopt as a country.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question, please. We have one right over here, maybe? A woman in a blue and white dress. Oh.
Hi. We talk a lot about inflation. Obviously, people are very worried about it. Prices are more expensive, than they've recently been. But I just wonder where you think the conversation around corporate greed gets lost in the narrative a lot for people. I think it's part of course, like the overall culture war that people want us to fight, so we're not paying attention. But I wonder why that's not more part of the narrative now that inflation's sort of regulated a little bit, why we're not focusing on why there's still record profits for people like Nabisco or General Mills, those sort of things.
So the rhetoric, so if you went back and looked in Brown's library, actually, digitally, you could read the Providence Journal from the 1890s, or the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic Journal Constitution from the 1890s, and it would be the exact same rhetoric about corporate greed and about the income inequality and how it was killing productivity and advancement in the country. And so these themes are embedded in the fabric of the American life. There's no question about that. The interesting thing to me historically is that the most intense accumulation of wealth happens in the late 19th century, besides the tech revolution now, but the late 19th century, and in the 35 years after that, we see the greatest amount of progress and advancement on labor rights, on women, on minimum wage, all the things that happened that really led to the progressive era happen after the period that people really intensely care about income inequality. But economic growth continues in that period of time. So I do believe that there are thresholds where America stands up collectively, individually, and says, we want our neighbors to be living safely and better than they are, and we want to make government make sure that happens. And that is the vehicle. So now when you look at it and you think about income inequality, thinking about technology and access to that, and thinking about 40 to 44% of Americans in the stock market, nobody else is. 40% of America goes to college of some kind, 60% don't. There are lots of things that government policies can change that will empower those that are not that don't benefit directly from corporate profits. So we've seen cycles in history when this happens, and I fully expect it's starting to happen much more forcefully around the country now in response to what we've seen in the last 2 decades, and I fully expect it will continue. Elections will matter in this regard, but the pressure points are on, and more people who share maybe your perspective are getting mobilized.
So I think we have time for one more quick question. Last question, last call.
All right, this person right here.
Thank you. So on one of your slides, you talked about actively creating an environment of tolerance. And so I wanted to ask you, because we know that words matter, why you chose the word tolerance and not acceptance?
Because I think human nature is a very complicated thing, and I think there are a lot of people who believe themselves to be good people, people who are moral, people who are loving, and they may have a particular religious affiliation, a religious set of beliefs, where they were taught some particular behavior or orientation was wrong or morally unacceptable, and it takes time for people to change their attitudes. It takes time to persuade people that human beings should be accepted for who they are. And to just simply say, you must accept this, or this is different from legal, I'm just talking about social, that you must accept this and embrace this, or you are a bad person, I think creates divides that make it harder to breed more acceptance. So starting with the idea of tolerance is something that somebody who may have been discriminated against in their own life for some reason can understand. You know, well, if you're not tolerant of this person, look what happened to you in your former life, or do you feel unaccepted or discriminated against? Can you understand how they feel? Putting aside whatever you've learned about anything that they are. And that, to me, is an important step. And I think we still are in a state in the United States of America where that step is necessary for a lot of people. So taking that step, I believe, leads to a broader culture that produces acceptance.
Thank you. So Wendy, thank you so much for joining us.
It's such a pleasure to be here and to see each and every one of you. I don't know, I'm like the 3rd year in, and it's Staff Development Day continues just to excite me. What wonderful weather, wonderful topic. I want to, before we leave, thank President Paxson. She wasn't scheduled to be here, and it speaks volumes when you know somebody who's so extremely busy says to them, I want to be part of Staff Development Day. So thank you, President Paxson. And what a great way to kick off Staff Development Day. And also thank you, Dr. Wendy Schiller, for your fabulous state of American life. I also wanted to make sure that I also acknowledged that we're very grateful for your knowledge and also for the guidelines you gave us around the message of hope. As you're enjoying Staff Development Day and also the activities, I'll ask you to take a moment to reflect on all of the connections you're making. I saw a ton of that happening, even at breakfast today. And this is a wonderful way to encourage collaboration and to really sort of develop that positive and lasting change that really echoes throughout our community. And we learned a lot today about getting involved with our local community. So I hope that you recognize and appreciate the value that you all bring to what makes Brown exceptional. On that note, thank you all for being here with us this morning. Just as a reminder, a couple of housekeeping items, that this morning's sessions start at 10:15, so you have time to still walk campus. Please be sure to check your calendar invites, the Staff Development Day website, and also the Brown University app for your session locations. As in all good fashion, we've got good food here, so we hope that you'll also enjoy lunch at Leslie's Farmers Market. And don't forget, you know Marie always loves a good party and celebration, so therefore at 2:45, we're going to have our end of day celebration on the green. We'll also have some great entertainment, games, plenty of refreshments, and we hope that you'll come back for that. But before I go, I want to also give a shout out to the talent development team for the great work they've done for Staff Development Day. And that also includes the many others, dining, media services, just to name a few, who've really put a lot of effort to make sure that you have a phenomenal day. And most importantly, thank you for being here today. Enjoy, make the connections, enjoy your learning, and have fun, and see you later. Thank you, everybody.